This is an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Now that we are nearing the end of September, it's time to prepare your garden for the winter. So what exactly do you need to do now to prepare your garden for next year? That's the question we put to Christine Milks, a lifelong gardener who also has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, which is a publication for a seniors association in the Kingston, Ontario region. Chris joins us once again via Zoom from Gananoque, Ontario. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. So, we chatted off air, and you brought up an interesting point, and that is sometimes people prepare for their gardens for the next year. They do it too early.
Oh, for sure. And sometimes they're tempted too early based on what they see available in the big box stores or grocery stores. And that has always been a traditional problem because larger stores get their stock in about a month before anybody in their right mind needs it. But now with climate change, that's kind of been compounded because now we're seeing stuff an extra month earlier than when we should be planting it. The climate change has changed the hardiness zones in Canada overall and in Ontario quite drastically over the past, 30 years, 40 years. So just as an example, where we live and we're right at the junction of the St. Lawrence River and Lake Ontario, we've traditionally been a 5B, and some of the islands would be little pockets where it was warmer climate. That would be like a 6A. It's just shocking when you look at the Canada hardiness zones now, and you see that since 2010, this area has now moved up a whole half a zone and is now a 6A. So that makes me assume that out on the river, those places are now like a 6B, probably heading to a 7.
Okay, so I'm an inner city kid. So
Yes.
What you're talking to me about right now is like Latin. What are the zones, and what does it mean in the zone from 5B to 6A? What does that actually mean?
It means we're getting closer to my dream of having fuchsia standard plants sometime. And here's the background to that. When we take these road trips, you go look at test gardens and stuff around the Niagara Peninsula. I was always so envious of the plants that would winter over, that were winter hardy in, like, say, that peninsula into Windsor. And that is probably the mildest place in Canada for growing plants. We're edging awfully close to being able to grow delicate plants and have them winter over. So the hardiness zones, they're planting zones. And traditionally, Ontario has gone from, there's 8 zones altogether, and they range from 0 to 7. And I have a feeling they're going to have to start expanding that to probably an 8. And that just means that plants that we consider delicate, that we grow them only as annuals because the winters would kill them, they might start being things that we could easily winter over these days. Montreal, by the way, I looked that up. Montreal is in the same growing zone as where I live. And it has also moved from a 5B to a 6A. So it just determines which plants you can grow.
Okay, so for those listening right now who might be in the United States, you mentioned climate change. It's getting hotter here, so I would assume it's also getting hotter there.
Oh, I would assume as much as well, Peter. And it's going to be interesting to see what the next version of the hardiness zones tells us. And it's just that we're probably the United States, central to southern United States, will start to certainly be moving closer and closer to what we consider to be tropical growing areas. But the only thing that climate change can affect, when I get thinking about it, is the hours of sunlight. Other than that, climate change is going to affect the frost-free days that you have in a year, the range of temperature, the lowest temperature you get in the winter, rainfall, and the only thing it's probably not going to affect is the hours of sunlight.
Okay, so I said at the beginning that we are near the end of September, and that you say that some people prepare their garden for the winter early. That's in normal times. Are we saying that it's even earlier than it should be now because of climate change?
Yes, for sure. In a nutshell, yes.
Okay, so
Um,
what's
let's
the
talk about spring flowering bulbs. If you're
okay?
putting in new plantings of spring flowering bulbs, typically we used to advise people in our garden center and whatnot to plant early mid fall, and now it looks like they should really be thinking about late fall to possibly even early winter. The bulbs that you buy for a new planting of spring flowering bulbs, they're basically in a dormant stage when you buy them. Now, should you plant them when you think you should, based on our old climate zones, you would probably want to make sure you had them into the ground before Thanksgiving in Canada. And that's not going to work now. I do, in most circumstances, the ground is too warm. That just causes the bulbs to now want to sprout and grow in this warm soil in the fall. That means it's kind of iffy whether they would survive the winter and reflower in the spring when you wanted them to, because it won't have enough time to gather strength into that bulb for reflowering in the spring. So you have to wait. The ground is a lot warmer than it used to be.
So you basically have to test the ground. You just can't go by the calendar, go by the ground.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. You go by the calendar, that means you're just looking to do it when it's convenient for you and not when it's appropriate for the plant or the bulb. I remember one time we had a customer who wanted bulbs put in very, very late into the year. It was in November. And my husband went out and rented a post hole digger, and he dug into a frozen ground and put the bulbs in. And he told the customer, he said, they'll be fine. And they were. And I think that's what we're getting closer to these days. I think you're going to have to start thinking about planting your bulbs in November, because typically they always advised you to wait until maybe you've had a first frost, or a week where the evening temperatures went between like 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, 40 to 50 Fahrenheit, and just trying to get the ground cool enough so that the bulbs aren't going to be tricked into thinking they should be growing. And I always remember Martha Stewart had a little rule of thumb, which I'm always keen on these little rules. Basically, go by the touch of the ground at about 6 inches deep. So dig a hole about 6 inches deep, because that's where you're going to plant the bulb. Put your hand down there. And if the ground is cool to the touch, you're probably okay to plant.
What are some of the do's and don'ts? Are actually some of the don'ts.
Okay. Some of the don'ts for fall gardening: don't remove all the leaves off your lawn unless you really, really want a tidy home front. It's better to let the worms get at them. The leaves will be gone by spring, and you will have enriched your soil. Don't trim all the berries off your shrubs. The birds will love them, and they'll appreciate all that. Don't fertilize. Please don't fertilize anything unless you're going to maybe put some bone meal in with your spring flowering bulbs or around some of your shrubs, because that is a very, very slow acting fertilizer. And that is a lovely resource for your plants to be able to grab in the spring. But other than bone meal, please don't fertilize.
We just about out of time, and there was one other thing that you mentioned when we talked off air that I found was absolutely interesting, and that was the idea of sacrificial bulbs when you're dealing with squirrels. Explain that.
Oh, right, right. Oh, and you'd always have people come in. They'd be so frustrated come spring to find out that these bulbs that they had planted so carefully in such a wonderful pattern, that squirrels had interfered and had decided to feed their little family, and had helped themselves to some of these tasty first quality bulbs. Now we had lots of people who recommended. So you do two bulb plantings. You do the one that you want to have for show. That's the one that you carefully plan. And then there's the other one that you plant on the edge of your property, or where you think the squirrels are going to get to it first before they get to your good stuff. And that's where you just buy a bag of the cheapest bulbs you can, a bag of like very inexpensive tulips, and plant them there, because it is true that it's probably going to stop the squirrels. They'll stop at the easiest food first and possibly leave your good stuff alone. And then we had one other customer. Oh, this is in the days of when there's also, it's a very good tip to plant your bulbs and then put some chicken wire over top of them. The chicken wire will stop the squirrels from digging up the bulbs, likely, unless it's a really harsh winter. And then come spring, the bulbs will find their way through the chicken wire and they'll flower and they'll be fine. So we had another customer who didn't want to even spend the money on chicken wire. She was very smart. She would trim her rose bushes in the fall after they finished blooming, and she would just simply lay the branches across her spring flowering bulb beds. And those lovely little thorns did a great job at keeping the squirrels away. And then come spring, the gardener, she said she felt almost giddy. She was so pleased with herself. She said it was just a simple job to just take a rake away the thorny branches, and she had saved her bulbs from the squirrels.
Thwarting the squirrels. I think we'll end it on that. Thank you very much, Christine, for being with us on the program once again. You have the regular column in The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine. Continued success with that. Thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Christine Milks, who has a regular column called The Constant Gardener in Vista Magazine, a publication for a seniors association in the Kingston, Ontario region.
You've just heard an exclusive excerpt from the Stuph File Program with Peter Anthony Holder. To hear any or all of the full hour-long shows, visit thestufffile.com. Stuph is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's thestufffile.com. A presentation of Flying Fish Communications.